Welcome to Ridgewood Talks. Through this podcast, we will be introducing you to some of the leaders and legends in our village. We'll keep you updated about fascinating local events, and we'll dig into the town's hot topics and so much more. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Jeannie Johnson, the founder of Ridgewood Talks and Ridgewood Walks. The goal of these initiatives is to create a kinder, more connected, and more vibrant community. I'm thrilled to be co-hosting this podcast with my good friend and all-around wonderful guy, Jordan Kaufman. We look forward to meeting with you weekly and hearing your thoughts on who and what you'd like to learn about in our beautiful hometown. Enjoy this episode.
Ready, set, go, kids. Here we are. Hey, Jordan, how's it going in Ridgewood, New Jersey?
It's going well. I think we're now off to the races for the school year. I think everyone's getting settled, and kids' sports are in full swing, and the weather's still beautiful. So I think everyone's doing pretty good here, and obviously that plays well to the subject at hand, the Board of Education candidates and election that's coming up in November. So what about you, Jeannie? Where are you in the States these days?
I'm on day 74 of a 100+ day RV cross-country journey, and I am on one of America's most scenic byways. I am on the shores of Lake Superior right now.
Oh, wow.
It's gorgeous. It is peak leaf season. It's just glorious. It's beautiful. But I'm very excited to be here with you again today. And of course, our guest, Mike Lembo. I'll go into his intro a little bit later, but I'm going to just go ahead and remind our listeners and actually thank them for tuning in and remind them again that there is a Board of Education election coming up on Tuesday, November the 7th. There are 2 board seats, each with a 3-year term, and that will be on the ballot. There are 7 community members that have stepped up to compete for these seats, and they have all agreed to chat with us. And through the course of these interviews, listeners, you will learn more about the candidates and where each one stands on issues that affect our schools and our community. So we ask the listeners and voters to submit questions to our Ridgewood Talks email address, and we're going to discuss those on this interview today. And we also invite listeners to attend the League of Women Voters Candidate Forum on October 18th, and that's going to be from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Ed Center on Cottage Place. And like we have said throughout all of these interviews, we encourage people to get there early because seats fill up fast. And then we also want to encourage you all to submit a question to the candidates at the forum because that's the best way to get to know them. And then today, we're going to get to know Mike Lembo a little bit more. Mike is the current president of the Ridgewood Board of Education, and he's serving his 2nd term in that position. And also, this is his 2nd election for Board of Education. He won the election back in 2020. He is a 3rd generation Ridgewoodian and is a product of the Ridgewood Public School System. He is also a graduate of the University of Scranton, where he served in ROTC. And Mike has been with the Ridgewood Police Department for just about 20 years, serving in various capacities. He's an instructor at the Bergen County Police Academy and teaches classes in cybersecurity and gives presentations to students and parents on how to navigate the internet safely and how to avoid being exploited online. Mike is also a prolific volunteer in the community. He's given time and talent to Dad's Night and Michael Feeney's Police Academy, as well as many other organizations. So thanks again, Mike, for being here. This is your 2nd time as a guest on our show. And if listeners want to hear that interview, the first interview that Mike gave us, they can look through the show notes and find that episode from March 26th of 2023. So let's kick things off again with a thank you for your service. Mike, we talked about, yes, thank you so much for being here and for serving. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording. The Board of Education is a 100% volunteer position, meaning these people get 0 stipend for doing what they do. And like I mentioned in episodes before, it can take up as many as 30 hours a week to perform the job effectively. And to serve on this board, you got to have a lot of stamina. And so again, we thank you for your service to the community.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for those kind words. But yes, we were saying before that it is a lot of it's a big commitment, but it's a commitment that I know myself and I'm sure all the other candidates, are ready for.
Great. So with that, I'd like you to clarify your perception of the role of a Board of Education board member.
Okay. Being on the Board of Education is a very noble, tireless job. And I want to make it so that we are five voices as a group, and we are there to speak for, most importantly, the student. But while we're overseeing the schools, make sure they're run efficiently. We're not there to administer anything. We hire our superintendent, who then does the day-to-day operations. We always give the why, and then the school and under the superintendent does the how. If the board wishes to have something passed, whether it's curriculum or it's an ideology or something like that, the board can kind of give those ideas, but it's really the day-to-day operations is always done by the school superintendent. I said it when we passed the late start in the beginning of this year, we would support it, but we weren't dictating what the day-to-day schedule was going to be, what all the nuances, but we wanted to make sure that this is what the students wanted, what the community wanted, and what the educators wanted. We have to listen to the community. We have to listen to our educators. And again, back to our students, our parents. Our parents are great resources. So many times we want to have input from our parents. And, we want to make sure that we gauge everybody's opinions though equally. One of our goals that's been pretty consistent for the last 3 years that I've been on the board has been inclusivity with the DEI aspect, but also we want to make sure that we hear from everybody. We don't want just one group having the loudest voice or the people that come to our meetings that are consistently like complaining about one thing without looking at all aspects. We want to make sure that any decision that we make everybody is thought of or representative. And obviously sometimes you have to, weigh things, but we want to make sure that we listen and hear from everybody. It's a very vital role. Ever since the last few years, I think it's been more and more people have been focused on their children's education because as a whole, an educated community is a thriving community. And we want to make sure that our schools are the best that they can be. We all know as being Ridgewood residents that people move here for the schools. And, it's one of the reasons. I don't want to say it's the only reason, but a large reason, that a lot of people move here are because of our school system. So we always want to be improving. And for me, I'm a product of the Ridgewood schools. My father was a product of the Ridgewood schools. My children will be projects of Ridgewood schools, but we all had different experiences. And I want to make sure that my children have the same, if not better experience. I don't want them to have a lesser experience, of course. So we always want to make sure, but we have to move with the times. Ridgewood is known for being on the forefront of the education community. And we want to make sure that we're always leading that way. Just like we just did with the Late Start Initiative. We were one of only 3 districts in the entire state. And you're going to start seeing more and more change to that.
That's a great answer. So with that, I'd also like you to help us understand why you're running for Board of Ed once again.
Okay, great. That's probably the number one question that I get asked, right? Because I think that right now we're kind of at a crossroad. I know we had spoken back in March about there's been a lot of turnover. And there's been a lot of issues that have come up. When I started back in, when I first decided to run, which is back in 2019, I have a different background than a lot of people that usually want to step up and run for the board. Not saying anything anyway on their end, but I was a prior educator that I went into public service with law enforcement. So I have more of a mindset of protecting children as a whole. And also, with my graduate degree in public administration, so right now, I want to make sure that our children are safe in the school. In fact, today is World Mental Health Day. And I always want to make sure that our children aren't worrying about, whether it's the pressures of school or physical insecurities. So those are things that I wanted to get into before the lockdown. Unfortunately, we had to shift a lot of focus because of COVID, but there's that background. Plus, we have a strategic plan review coming up as well. I want to make sure my graduate degree was doing strategic plans, and that is a long-term plan that we can stay focused on. We're just coming up to our last year of our current strategic plan. And I want to make sure that groups of people don't come into our Board of Education and wanting to sway things either way. We have a very large budget. There's no question about that. We also have a lot of aging infrastructure. We need to have a way that we can come to common sense solutions to our entire properties, whether it's maintenance, whether it's buildings, whatever, without, I don't want to number crunch, but I also don't want to not do progress. I've seen over the years, even before I was on the board, if things get let by the wayside, down the line, it costs even more money to update or maintain them. We need to weigh, where are we going to spend our money? I also am very concerned sometimes when people, the fighting. We need to foster a support of our educators. When our educators know that we're supporting them, they then, that trickles down to our students and it trickles down to the rest of our community. A large part of our educators are community members, and we need to get to that table. Next year, there's a contract for the REA, which is our teachers union. We need to make sure that they know that we're not going to give them everything away, but we also need to know that they're respected, and we have to come to a very logical conclusion so we can kind of continue to move forward. I just don't want any sort of I want things to run smoothly. And I feel that by taking the reins and just talking to each other common sensely, we could do that.
That's great. I have two questions for you. The first one I'm going to ask is for you to help us understand a little bit more clearly what the actual budget is and what the breakdown is like of our taxes.
What do you mean though?
What I want you to tell us is for every $1 that I give in taxes,
I understand. Okay.
What portion of that goes to the municipality and what portion of that goes to the schools? That's what I want to know.
Okay, understood. And that's a great question because as we all know, this will be our second election since the budget cycle has been changed. And we used to, as a community, we used to vote in April because the school budget has to be approved because the school operating year is July 1st to June 30th. So you have to approve a budget before that time period. So when our election cycle used to be in April, this community could vote for or against a budget. The school budget is the largest impact of our taxes. It's almost 70%. I got to look the exact number of it. Whereas our municipal taxes are very minimal and our county tax is even smaller, our federal tax, it gets smaller as it goes. But the largest
it's 75. I think
75. Yeah. So right there. So our school budget is the largest portion of all of our taxes. And that's it. So when we used to vote on our budget, and for a long time, and you may even have this data, it was almost never got voted down. It was a continuous, it passed many, many years. The last election that we had a school budget election, which was in 2020, was defeated. When the school budget is defeated, the council and the school board get together and they have to go through and they have to make decisions of because clearly the town does not want that budget anymore. It's an interesting thing because there's really no set parameters of how much needs to be cut or how much needs to be kept in. In that, it was $650,000 was removed from the budget. A lot of it, though, was maintenance. Some of the things that we've seen, trickle down 3 years later that we're now seeing, well, we may need to bring those back. We have to look at what was working, what's not.
So I want to delve into that just a little bit.
Sure.
Just and clarify my understanding. So the way that I understood it is Governor Chris Christie at one point said, look, you guys, I'm looking at all these school board budgets across the state, and I see that voter turnout is really, really poor for these school board budgets. So I'm going to leave it up to the municipalities to see if they actually want to spend the money, whatever it is. I believe it's around $60,000, $75,000 each year for the voters to come out and either vote for or against the school board budget. And he said, look, if you don't want to spend that money and you want to put that money toward either a person or a program, go ahead and do that. I'm going to leave that up to you guys to decide. So what I understood was our board at that time said, no, we're going to keep it. We're going to keep it in place. We're going to see what happens. So they kept it in place for a couple of years, and they recognized that, what was it? Something like 7% of our voters came out to vote for the Board of Ed budget. So then they determined that, you know what, we're going to eliminate it. And by the way, the budget as far as I know, in 20 years, the budget has only been defeated 2 times.
Right.
And
that's why I knew it was very, very, very infrequent.
yeah. So that was kind of like, it's just kind of like a rubber stamp. They go through. Well, then all of a sudden, I believe it was Mr. Donnie, he's on the board now. He and Susan Knudsen, former mayor Susan Knudsen, brought it to the public and said, look, we want to bring this vote back. They did all the paperwork for the state and said, let's make sure that our voters get to do this. And so they actually did it. I guess it was I remember being at that village council meeting, and it was during the summer. And from what I understood, the sitting board members didn't recognize that that was taking place, but whatever, it happened. They ended up getting the vote back. And when the first year that they got the vote back, the vote was defeated, or the budget was defeated. And then, like you said, then the protocol was it goes to the village council, and the village council, in collaboration with the Board of Ed, decides to take out things. And so that was that $600,000 that was taken out of the school board budget during COVID. Is that the budget cycle was during COVID?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. Yes, that is correct.
So it seemed like, it's a little scary to hear that wow, you took out $600,000 of our budget during a critical time, especially when you were saying it was maintenance. Is that something that, when you think of custodial sorts of things, and what an emphasis that we had on making sure that everything was sterilized, was that affected? I don't really know. I honestly don't know.
No.
Yeah, tell me if I explained it all correctly, because that's my understanding, but I want you to correct the record if I'm mistaken.
You're good. You I think everything was correct. The issue, when I was saying that the maintenance was it wasn't like sanitizing, like safety for there was actually a lot of federal money for like the PPE and like all the hand washing stations. That wasn't affected. It was mostly duplication of services, or like supervisory positions that they were fixing, making sure certain aspects were done. No programming was affected, and it was mostly, I have to look to double check exactly what it was, but it was like a supervisor position that was checking on, cleanliness of rooms, or when we had custodial supervisors on scene that were also checking. So it was just kind of like a duplication.
Okay.
There was nobody would ever cut anything out for safety, or for, especially that time. And there was so much. We had a lot of money that came in for, like, the hand washing stations and that. So that was not affected.
All right. You mentioned earlier something about the fighting, and I want you to clarify that, but I'm going to ask this question because this was asked multiple times from our listeners, that there was an unprecedented turnover, those I think were your exact words, an unprecedented turnover. Since 2020, we have had 4 superintendents, 2 assistant superintendents, and 4 business administrators. And this is the question that is being asked by our listeners. Do you believe that has caused instability with our administration, with the teachers, with our students?
I just want to correct one word, though. I wouldn't say fighting. I would be more like disagreements. I don't want to say. And also, and I agree with what you're saying, but first off, I just want to address this question has come up a few times. I don't necessarily agree with the numbering. We say 4 superintendents. That is technically correct, but our last Dr. Fitz was an interim, and even Dr. Gorman was an interim. And then we made him he was actually an acting superintendent. So if we went by those numbers, it would have been 5. Also, with our human resources director leaving, she retired. And we also had, right now, our assistant superintendent, we did lose one. Right now, we're in an interim one. So sometimes, the numbers make it a lot worse than it is. That being said, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not sugarcoating it and saying, oh, no, everything is okay. But there are a few points in there that makes, when people see all those numbers, like, wait, it's just that, everybody, when they go to a superintendent search, when one superintendent leaves, there has to be an interim there as well. So I just want to make sure that that's kind of unknown. But you're right. And we spoke about this back in March as well. We do have some staff that retire. They're getting ready to go, they're retiring, or they wanted to go to a different project. That's always going to be the case. That being said, there are some staff members that have left for whatever reason. Our human resources director, Ms. Murphy, she does exit interviews. So I'm not always privy to why people are leaving. That is a question I usually want to know, because if another district is paying more, another district is doing X, Y, and Z, a districts are poaching, I kind of want to know that. If the staff is unhappy, why? So I do see that when people leave, and this year we had our turnover of our administration, which was huge. We have a new superintendent and a new business administrator. Miss Murphy came in last fall. So that is a little bit unstable. So in the beginning of the year, there were a few things that we kind of were holding off on the board, trying to wait till we had our stable administration in place, whether it was committee assignments and reworking how our meetings are run. Not saying how the information is going out to the public, but more like how, the internals of how everyone's jobs are more defined, because we have a new superintendent, new business administrator, they want things to run their way. So we have to kind of bring their way to the Ridgewood way and kind of meet in the middle somewhere. A great thing that someone brought up the other day to me was our budget cycle last year. We unfortunately lost our business administrator smack dab in the middle of the budget presentation season. So we weren't able to get what we normally want to do. So we have now a set schedule for Ms. Cott to get that information of the budget out. We want to make sure we have those public meetings. We want to make sure that we're hitting all of our deadlines. Our last go around in our budget, our auditors were kind of at the end of the line. It was January, February, and auditors were still going through. I just want to be clear that the auditors, it's procedural. It's not that there's anything that we have to go through that. It's a kind of checks and balance. They're there now. So it's now late September, early October. We have them at the board working months earlier. So there was definitely some things that got pushed because of this turnover. We just passed our goals now for this year when we normally would have done this in the spring. So we're a little behind on things, but I would say in about a month or so, we're going to be much more evened out, and we're working out that kinks, and it's like that forming, storming, and when a group comes together. But I do agree with you that it was unfortunate the last couple of years, but I think we're in a good spot now.
Well, that's good to hear, because I guess my clearer question would be, do you think the communication or the communication style among the board, and from what I'm recognizing, that there's a lot more, maybe seems like contention. I don't know if it is. It doesn't feel right, that conversations don't flow as smoothly as they have in the past. That may or may not be true. But do you think that communication style affects this turnover and things like that?
Well, I think a lot of the things that the public doesn't see is more affects it. Our board meeting is 2-3 hours every other week, whether our committee meetings or our interactions, with the superintendent or, our board secretary are much more frequent. So I think that would affect it more. As the president, I try to give out updates to the board on a consistent basis, because me and the superintendent have a different relationship. And so if I get brought up to speed on something, I want everybody to know. I try to keep everybody informed. And when we find out information, sometimes, I don't always ask a lot of questions during a meeting because I've kind of worked through them out on the back end. But you're right. Like sometimes the board meetings are only a small glimpse of what the rest of the bigger picture that some people see also. So
all right, so I want to move into more questions that came
Sure.
from our listeners. Let's see. Well, a lot of people are very concerned about what's happening at the federal level, or at the national level, I should say,
Okay.
about book banning. And so everyone wants to know what your position is on banning books.
That's a great question, because there's a bunch of things. We started off with that saying that there's a lot of, hot topics lately. And, one of the things that get brought up, and whether it's banning books or certain, topics that we brought in school. One that we just went through was in our wellness classes, right? And that was kind of brought up. You have to be sensitive to, parents, wishes. If they wish, they don't want their child to view something or whatnot. But we also have to put a lot of faith in our educators. I'm talking about the book ban, but I'm also talking about other sensitive subjects here. But I'm talking about the health and wellness classes, and you hear talking points on the news or on the internet or whatnot. And then, I'm asking questions of our staff, go, wait a minute, in the curriculum committee. And I was like, are we talking about this at kindergarten? Like, no, it's taught in a different manner at a higher level, higher age group, and without context, facts are useless, right? So you can say they're talking about this all day long, but until you know what the context of what is being instructed to our children, we need to know what it is. So whenever there's a controversial topic that comes up, and we get these, whether they're emails or parents come to a board meeting or someone just talks to a board member and is concerned about something, whether it's a book or a lesson or whatever, we usually do ask and say, hey, what is going on here? What's going on? It's almost always explained in a different light. So we want to make sure that we are sensitive to feelings and ideologies of our community and of our parents, but we should not be banning books for certain reasons. And that's, we see it if, I'm sure your listeners are very savvy and look at even school boards around us in our area that are doing things differently. We are trusting our educators. We're letting them know that we're listening to our community. We want to know what's going on, but we are not going to halt progress of education just because somebody doesn't like something being said. That being said, if a parent or a guardian feels that they don't want their child to be in this lesson, in the health lesson or in this class reading this book, they have that right to not participate. Now, I know there's another side of that say, well, then my child is being excluded, but every parent has a right to know what their child is being educated. We have it, listed on the Atlas website. And if they don't want to participate, they have that right to do so. But we're not going to stop all students from learning because someone doesn't like that as well.
Okay, so that brings me into the next question. So you said that parents' opinions weigh heavily on the decisions that the board makes. And so one of the things that was talked about quite extensively by the parents was world languages. And there was a whole situation with the world language program at the elementary level, and also PE, because it turns out that our state quality monitoring score went down significantly as a result of the lack of world languages and our PE program at the elementary level. So if you could just walk us through that and explain why that happened and, what has been done to rectify that.
Okay. So I'm going to start with there's good news at the end of the story. So you're right. I'm glad you brought up both because those are both two issues. It was our PE and our world language. I'll talk first about our PE because it's a little bit quicker. The state comes through quite frequently, but every once in a while there's a big mandate and they push certain standards that have to be met. Our students need a certain amount of time every day, but all the time of physical education and wellness. Ridgewood was able, prior to this, our recess time during lunch and some of the play times were able to be counted towards those minutes. Unfortunately, when this new mandate was changed, no longer could the recess time be counted. So we were actually under the allotted time, the mandated time. So we were out of compliance. 2 years ago in our budget, this was presented. We needed to hire additional physical education teachers to keep up with that demand at the elementary school level. This year, we were able to get those educators in because not only were we out of compliance, we were being sued because we were out of compliance. There was a lawsuit, and this was not only were we, at the end of the day, we were affecting the children. I mean, I started to saying that at the end of the day, our biggest constituent, the most important thing of why we're on the school board are our children, and it's affecting our children and their lives. But now we're costing money because there's a lawsuit going, and then there's dragging out hiring. So finally, the board had come together and now we have hired those physical education teachers. We are now in compliance with the physical education requirements. So we're good there. Not as quick as I would have hoped, but it is there now. The world language, similar backstory where there was a requirement that students be kind of exposed to world language in the elementary school level. Ridgewood, for many years, we're using like an online, like an audio software type, and it was actually quite costly. It was determined that hiring teachers would actually have been more cost effective. But now comes to a point, what languages are we going to expose our elementary school children to? Besides, there was a group of people that did not want world language at all because they didn't want to spend money. Our middle school, for the most part, was the first time that our students are in a full-time, they start in 7th grade, they pick up a language. They can choose, Latin, Spanish, and French, and they're able to choose. And then when they go to the high school, we have a robust catalog of different languages. So some of the debate became, well, let's get a language that feeds into the middle school, then that feeds into the high school. So a student theoretically could start taking, I'm going to use Spanish just because but like a student takes Spanish in elementary and they can continue that all through high school. The board had come together. We finally said, listen, we need to fill this. We are behind. We want to, obviously there's a cost factor, but again, students are more important. We want to make sure that we're fulfilling this mandate. We finally agreed. Let's see Miss Murphy with the human resources go out, get us the 3 best teachers that you can get. So when she had come back, there were 3 different language teachers. We had a Spanish, German, and Mandarin Chinese. So then it became a discussion of, well, wait a minute, how is this going to work? We have 6 elementary schools, 3 teachers, 3 different languages, very, very confusing. When I first saw that, I was also confused. I wanted to explain. We had our head of humanities supervisor, Mr. Mark Ferreri, come in and kind of explain us, what was the plan going forward. Again, the board's not directing the curriculum. But we also do want to know what's going on. How are we going to implement this? We're going to pay for 3 teachers. How are you going to push this out? It was a little confusing, but I put my faith in on our staff. We went back to the drawing board and we decided, let's decide on one language. We decided with Spanish, which was the original recommendation, and let's push out and find if we can get the 3 best Spanish teachers. By miracles of her hard work, Miss Murphy was able to get 3 Spanish teachers. One Spanish teacher was the original Spanish teacher from that was going to be hired. We did not hire those 3, and then we ended up getting 2 more. That has been in place, so they were hired. However, the curriculum is not into effect until November 1st. I think it's going to happen at the end of this year, just because this didn't really occur until late July, early August, that we're finally able to get all 3 on board. And we need the curriculum set from the curriculum committee, and Mr. Freeman are going to make sure that we get those students out there. So like I said in the beginning, it has a happy ending that we're now in compliance with the world language, and we have the extra PE teachers for our students to get those times. But you were right. Our QSAC scores got dinged because we were out of compliance. There were multiple ways that we were out of compliance when we needed to just say, hey, listen, this is what is mandated, and let's figure out a solution to go with this mandate.
Yeah, so my question there too is, well, I guess I would need you to clarify. So it really wasn't a budgetary issue. It sounds to me like it was more of a communication issue at the board level in determining what world language you should choose and so on and so forth. Is that accurate?
Like which language? Yeah, there was a lot of questions of what specific language was going to be taught, and it went from, there were some, whether in the community or on the board, that didn't want any language, to we want some language, and then it was like then it became what languages, and then the question, do we do multiple languages? And then it was finally determined, let's just do the 3 Spanish.
Gotcha. All right. So I want to take it on a little lighter note, and I want you to tell me, when people go, I just love this question so much. I want you to tell us how you want the community to think about you when they see your name on the ballot.
That's a great question. I like that one. So I hope, when I came in, I was kind of, my family's name was known, but not a lot of people really knew who I was. And I was starting to speak to more and more people. I would hope after the past 3.5 years, people understand that I have that stability, I have that leadership qualities, and I listen. I answer the phone when people call. I answer the emails as fast as I can, and I'm around. And they know that I am approachable. They can talk to me. Not everybody calls me saying that I'm the greatest, and they always agree with me. People sometimes like, hey, I think you did was wrong, or I don't understand it. And I'll explain it to them. I have been like, you know what, you're right. I never saw it from that way. I like to have discussions with people. My slogan, if you will, on the ballot is keep moving forward. And that's what we need. My original one was that, we need to move Ridgewood forward, but now we need to keep moving forward, because we can't stay put. If we keep continuing the path that we are, that's not progress. We mentioned, the high turnover. We need to keep moving forward. We have a great administration in place right now. We have the best of the best. And we need to, while we're looking towards the future, we need a stable board that's going to look out best for our students and best for our community. So I think that people, by knowing that they see my name, they say that's stability, that's a voice of reason, and can kind of pull everybody together and get things done. We were able to get a lot of projects done this year while I was president that have been, stagnant. I mean, Late Start, for instance, has been talked about for so long. And, I said, I'm like, we have to talk about this and we have to get something done. Either we're going to move on or we're going to do it. And I'm so glad that we finally were able to get that, come to a conclusion that everybody was comfortable with. And we'll find out, as time goes on, we may need to tweak things. But I think
Yeah.
we
So we're going to have Jeff Nias, the principal of Ridgewood High School, on in November, I believe.
excellent.
And he's going to talk about some of monitoring the late start, and they'll have some more data to show how successful this initiative has been rolled out. So we're really excited about hearing about that. The other thing you mentioned about your accessibility, I'd really like you to share with our listeners how to contact you. So if they do want to reach out and have any other questions, what are your campaign websites and things like that?
Sure. Campaign wise, super easy to remember. I'm voteforlembo@gmail.com. And I have a Facebook page. So it's facebook.com/voteforlembo. Super easy to remember because I just want people to remember just to vote for me. But also if somebody has any questions, most people have my personal, which I'm not going to give out as a campaign wise, or if they make a mistake and email the board, I usually redirect it as well. So
sounds good. Jordan, you're up.
Mike, I think, thanks again, obviously, for your service in your previous term, and, very helpful to have, someone as candid and willing to kind of talk to the community. And I guess as you look at some of the situations that you have, and that you're hearing from parents, but as well as you with your, call it, perspective of being on the board and seeing some of the conversations, what do you think some of the issues that parents should be thinking about that are really important that they're probably not prioritizing because of some of the national conversations and what the media might be saying?
It's tough to say, but I appreciate that question because I hear parents from all different sides. But one of the things that I always tell people is our students, our kids are listening. They're listening, they're paying attention, they want to weigh in on things, especially our older students, the high school students. We need to listen to them a lot of times. When we are, discussing matters, we need to know that whatever we do, and, because we're just discussing the late start, when we make these decisions, they're going to affect our student. And we want to make sure that we ask them, hey, what's going on? Like, one of my things I was talking about is our children's, their mental health and part of the strategic plan, the resiliency. And we want to make sure with our inclusivity, all the students, we pile so much on them. And, I know at the high school level, we're doing a much better job. I wish they had it when I was there. They preparing students just to apply for college. Dr. Gorman and Mr. Nias with they have that group where they come in and kind of help the college process go through. And now that that's all changed, so they had to revamp it because, a lot of schools aren't doing test scores anymore or projects. And I wouldn't even know how to apply to college right now, right? Like it's very different. And so we have to think about and listen to our students and also think about the pressures that we put on them to excel and to be great, because we want to make sure that every student is heard and also every student is given the opportunity to flourish. And what we do is going to affect them. So if we're fighting, or if we're disagreeing, or if we're having this, and we're not talking to each other in a positive manner, we do not have to agree with each other. I wish we all did, but if we're getting up there and acting in a certain way, we're doing that in front of our students and our kids. And do we really want them to think that's positive? We've seen that on the national level on elections, and we're like, wait, why are people acting this way? So we need to listen to each other's varying opinions and come to logical conclusions. And at the end of the day, it's our community at stake. Like our educated community is a positive, a thriving community, and we got to do it for all of us.
No, that's helpful. And I think, as you said before, your perspective of thinking about kids' safety. And then I think that answer, highlights the being thoughtful about kids' experience and what challenges they're really facing. And that's probably one of the things that as we, sit around and talk about some of the issues which we think are important as parents, we sometimes aren't thinking about how our kids are viewing their experience in the school. And I think you raised a great point. I mean, with applying to colleges, it really depends on how much help you're getting at home. For some of us, we have, parents or siblings that went through it, and we get a lot of support. And for other people, they don't get as much support. And so that's always something we have to be thoughtful who, where does that responsibility ultimately fall and how can we help our school system? So very, very helpful to kind of add that different view.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Mike, for taking time to talk to us today. Really appreciate it. Wish you all the luck for the election. And everyone that's listening, please don't forget to go out and vote on Tuesday, November the 7th.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me. We'll talk soon.
Such a
Good luck,
pleasure.
Mike.
All right. Take care.
Take care, y'all.